Okay, well, hello, and thanks for joining me, Andrew Selley, and Ufi Ibrahim on one of the food farming and countryside trade unwrapped videos. They're meant to be conversations around the kitchen table. So as you can see, Ufi is around her kitchen table, and I'm around one of our show kitchens in our Slough depot. The idea of these videos is really to give us a chance to talk about what people sometimes see as complex issues to do with trade in a non-complicated and non-complex way. So hopefully that will come across today. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Andrew Selley. I'm the CEO of BidCorp in the UK. We have a number of businesses such as BidFood and BidFresh who supply the hospitality industry with food and beverages and packaging and disposables, which is obviously quite challenging in the current environment. And Ufi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Ufi Ibrahim. I am the Chief Executive of the Energy and Environment Alliance. We are an institution helping the transition of the hospitality industry to net zero carbon. And that has a significant amount of focus on food and food waste in particular, but as well as other areas all around energy and sustainable operations, construction and development as well. So looking forward to the conversation, Andrew.
Okay, well, obviously we're here to talk about trade. I suppose what does trade really mean, and what does trade mean in the light of COVID and Brexit, and what impacts we think that may have on, I suppose, specifically for ourselves, the hospitality industry, but obviously the wider sort of public in general. So I guess my first question to you, Ufi, is what impact do you think that the COVID-19 has already, we obviously have seen the huge impacts it's had on the hospitality sector, but what impact do you think that combined with leaving the EU will have on trade over the next few years?
Well, I mean, you have probably been experiencing this, Andrew, you're at the forefront of this. That we have really been experiencing a protracted crisis management period. And usually crisis management doesn't last for this length of time. And looking forward in the short term, it seems to me that there's going to be at least a few more months of very severe crisis management. And that has decimated our industry, particularly the SMEs. I mean, they are all in survival mode. And I can only imagine the impact on your business. And I'd really like you to share as much as you can. So I think that the focus will remain on COVID and crisis management. I find it challenging to perceive that the SME is going to be able to turn its attention to understanding what the impact of the new EU trade agreement is going to have on their business. So, the import-exports will probably hit home first and foremost because they will need to import certain food stocks for their business. And that's probably something that you're very focused on as a business, I'm sure. And then staff shortages, I think that's going to probably only have an impact on the businesses in the midterm, probably not in the short term, because they're so focused on crisis management and survival. So I think that we're probably not going to see the full extent of the impact of the EU trade agreement and the new sort of Brexit rules on hospitality businesses in the UK for the foreseeable future, not in the short term. In the midterm, I think we're going to really start to feel that change and seeing much more in terms of businesses adapting to that and adapting to the new rules. So, I mean, tell me, what about your business? You must have done so many scenario analyses, probably prepared for this, hopefully, prepared for any eventual outcome. So now we finally have some clarity, which is good for business in a sense. At least there is some certainty to replace that uncertainty. So there's something to plan for. So how are you doing that, Andrew? I mean, talk to us a little bit about your planning and preparation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that over the last 4 years, we spent the first 3 years talking about nothing but Brexit, but in the run-up to Brexit, it was hardly discussed because, as you say, the main issue was around COVID and crisis management. And I think I was just actually doing a video this morning for our internal communications, and I said, on the one bright thing is we can now see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination program, etc. The only thing is we just don't know how long the tunnel is. Certainly, it's another 3-month tunnel at the moment. And in terms of the impact on our business, I think last March our business declined by 70% in a week, as the hotels and restaurants and pubs and theme parks and travel hubs and everything else were closed. Now, obviously, as ever, the hospitality industry has adapted with more and more people doing takeaway and developing new sort of customer offerings that way. So we were probably back up to about 60–65% of normal business coming up to the end of last year. But unfortunately, about 25% of our business is education. So now that they've shut down education for the first quarter, we're back in a tough place. I think in terms of trade and preparing for Brexit, obviously we had 3 opportunities in 2019 to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. So we did lots of analysis around our imports, as you say, and countries of origin and risk, and the importance of all the individual products to our customers, and we worked out what sort of contingency stocks we would need to buy in and everything. So as I say, we did that 3 times during 2019, unrequired, and we did it again in December, because right up until the last minute we didn't know if it was going to be with a deal or without a deal. So again, that was the 4th time we built stock that wasn't required, but better safe than sorry, as they say. Yeah. I think the biggest change that we will see over the next sort of 12 months will be more businesses buying more product from British producers, and I think that's going to be an opportunity for the SMEs that you were talking about just now. I think for ourselves, we already buy about 65% of product from UK suppliers, and we would envisage that increasing. And I know that both, I'm sure the others as well, but certainly I've seen Aldi and Morrison's sort of make public proclamations that they're going to buy British, and they want SMEs to get in contact with them to see what opportunities they would have to sell their products through those stores.
I mean, that as in all crises, there are significant opportunities, and that, in a sense, one would, I think, have more confidence that the standard of the foods that we'll be eating, if they are more local, should be better, and we should be, safer in terms of things that we hear on the news, for example, about trade discussions between the United Kingdom and the United States of America around food imports and food trade policy. And there's a lot of, risk that people talk about in terms of that type of relationship, lowering food standards in the United Kingdom. Have you done, what is your view as a business on that, in terms of food standards and food trade policy? And is local better for us?
Well, I think local is an interesting word, isn't it? Because local means different things to different people. So for me, obviously, I would say British product would be local, but for a lot of people, local might be within a 10-mile radius of where the pub or the restaurant is, for example. But I think wherever the food comes from, I think the provenance of it and the quality of it and the standards by which it was produced and imported and distributed along the supply chain are really important. And I think we do have those very high standards in the UK, and certainly from our perspective, we would want to maintain those and ensure that they're not eroded. I think it's quite an emotive area, and I think you see a lot of the headlines around the famous chlorinated chicken and various other things that may or may not enter the food supply chain. I think the key for me is it's got to be around education, because I think if policymakers try to tell people what quality of food they should eat, generally speaking, as we've seen over the last 9 months, you know, the British tend to rebel against policymakers. So to me, it's more around, you know, educating the consumers around the different choices that they would have under any trade agreement with regards to food and food quality. Because ultimately, if people see a product and they see it's cheap and they reckon it's okay, why wouldn't they buy it? But if the standards and the quality of the governance in the supply chain behind it are very poor, then somehow we need to be making people aware of that and providing that education. And that's, you know, one of the biggest challenges, I think, in terms of how you educate the public around the trade-offs that we're going to have to make potentially.
Yeah, definitely. But
I mean,
it is very complex, though, isn't it? And I mean, I guess one of the things that I admire most about this program is that it opens up this very complex topic to a much broader representation of people across the country. So, you know, literally from farm to fork, that whole sort of supply and value chain, people or citizens across that entire chain can actually feed into this program, which is what I think differentiates it from many other programs that focus on trade policy, simply because it's just so complex and it's difficult to unpack that complexity. So for a business such as yours, I think it's probably easier than it would be for someone who is not in the industry, or even an SME in the industry. They find it very difficult, very challenging. I actually had a look at the Food Standards Agency website, to look at their interpretation of the new EU trade agreement and the impact on legislation. I also had a look at, gov.uk and all of the sort of legislative impact that this change will have, and it's very complex. So I guess that a way to simplify that, to enable businesses to understand very quickly, the SME, how they should react, is going to be important. One of the things that struck me is, in most of the topic headlines, so import, export, food labeling, and other such things. One of the lines was, if you have an agency, or if you're working with a sort of a larger agent, then they should be able to inform you, they should be able to help you. So that made me think about your business. I mean, your business is very much in that sort of position to be able to advise your customers who are serving others, be they in the public sector or in the private sector. And I was going to ask you, what percentage of the industry in the UK would you say that your business and others like yours sort of cover? So what kind of coverage would we have in terms of the hospitality food service business?
Well, I think the wholesale supply chain is quite fragmented. I would imagine that with the likes of ourselves and Breaks and someone like Booker, that's still probably only 35–40% of the market. But all of the wholesalers recognise that their role is to inform and guide their customers. Obviously, we've been doing it on things like allergens for quite a long time. Obviously, there's more of a requirement to do it around nutritional values and those sorts of things. And that may well, as you say, start to extend to trade issues and food governance issues. But I think the crux of it, again, will be that ultimately a food wholesaler like myself or others, we will provide what the customer needs, and the customer will provide what their consumers need. So ultimately, there has to be that education up and down the chain, because if the consumers are demanding something and it's what you and I may deem to be a lower standard product, whilst still being legal, that demand will pull through and people will supply that. So if we have an aspiration to maintain the standards of food that we have within the supply chain, then that's why I come back to the thing that education is key. in terms of educating the public in terms of what their choices are. And I'm not sure that there's that sort of forum within government or industry or whatever who sees its role as educating the public, educating all of us as to what our choices are. I mean, I don't know if you know of any. I don't know whether that would be the Food Standards Agency or Public Health England or something like that, but I do think there needs to be that concerted effort around, in the new environment that we find ourselves. You will come and face these choices, and you need to be informed as to what the pros and cons are of those choices.
Yeah, I agree with you, and some more joined up, perhaps, thinking between, between the HSE, between Public Health England, between Food Standards Agency, and other such governmental institutions and associations, I think, is going to be very valuable to help to share that education. Yeah. I absolutely agree with you on that. But what about prices, Andrew? I mean, a lot of there's been a lot of debate and conversation over the past few months in the run-up to this agreement about the impact that this may have on food prices. What is your view on that?
I would imagine that the impact will be pretty negligible now, insofar as obviously the main impact that would have influenced pricing would have been tariffs. So if we've escaped tariffs, the only other impact will be around demand and availability and the ease of importing. I don't imagine that demand will change significantly. Obviously, I don't think that availability should be impacted. Obviously, as you say, that some of these things will work out more in the medium term. So we don't yet know the impact of the new sort of paperwork and legislation that we need to adopt when we're importing products. Obviously, we don't have the tariffs, but we do have extra paperwork. So will that impact on supply? I'm not sure yet. And will it impact on cost in terms of what importers have to do to bring the product into the UK? I don't know, but I would imagine, in the scheme of things, that will be, a negligible impact compared to the what could have happened with tariffs being implemented, etc.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And in terms of the going back to the education piece, I mean, what information do you think that the public would be interested in having that enables them to make that informed decision? And how do we communicate that? Because it's the same old argument of it's probably easier to communicate things in a retail environment where you have the pack and you can look at the pack and you can see the country of origin and you can see whether it's organic or free range or red tractor or whatever the accreditation that may go with it. Specifically within the hospitality sector, we've always had that challenge of how do you, communicate to the consumer what they're having. What are your thoughts around the sorts of information that could be available and how we communicate that to consumers?
Well, in terms of accreditations, there are so many, aren't there? I mean, there's, and so that's already quite confusing, I think, for the customer. And it might be an opportunity, perhaps, to rethink that, perhaps, and just simplify it, perhaps to try and get some more joined up accreditations around communicating to the customer what that means. I mean, what does red tractor mean? I'm not sure many consumers actually understand what that means.
No.
So I think that would be an opportunity at the moment to rethink that. And the other thing is, of course, particularly around COVID and the impact of staying at home over the past year almost, the impact of technology has been significant. So I think that there are new players who can help to provide that education facility for hospitality businesses. Yeah. So the Deliveroos of this world now have much more contact, if you like, with the hospitality customer than perhaps they did before. And these new sort of agents in between, these communication agents, I think can play a much bigger role, as can all forms of technology, apps, all these digital apps. I think the players are suddenly there are so many more players now involved. The question is, how can those players work together more collectively to actually provide meaningful education channels and to ensure the education that's being provided is consistent?
Yeah.
So, that comes back, I guess, to the accreditations. It's about consistency so that the consumer doesn't get a different piece of information and education from one source that they would from another. That's going to be challenging, I think. How are we going to balance that? How can that be managed? Is that a role for government, or is that a role for, how can the private sector align to make sure that the education is going to be consistent and accurate as well?
I think you're right that the accreditations could do with simplifying, and I would assume that would be a role for government or DEFRA or somebody, insofar as, yes, most people may not understand what red tractor means, but they know it means something good.
Yeah.
It's like the old kite mark, safety mark, isn't it? I don't know what it means, but it's got the kite mark, so it must be good. And that's almost like having the minimum standard. And as you say, with the technology advances now, you could use almost like a virtual reality thing on a pub restaurant, where you scan the QR code and you get the full sort of provenance and history of the steak that you're eating, or whatever. That's really at the top end of what we're looking for. But I suppose the question is how you secure the lower end of the market in terms of what are the minimum standards that we should be expecting and accepting, and how do we communicate to people that all of this food complies with the minimum standards, which is about being back to those more sort of standardized and easy to understand accreditations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And some of the changes that COVID have introduced, I think, are going to be structural changes that are here to stay. So the relationship of the customer going into the restaurant in the future, and perhaps not finding a menu, but finding a QR code, which provides you access via your phone or your to your smartphone to the menu, and then the information that can provide. And we're already seeing that customers are demanding more and more information about the provenance of the food that they're eating, where it comes from, the carbon associated with the food that they're eating, carbon miles, has this been transported for miles and miles? If so, why? Why can't we have local? Why do we have to have this food imported? So there's so much more information that customers are looking for. So I think a real opportunity there for businesses. And I guess your business plays an important role in that, because you have to provide a lot of that information to the hospitality, restaurant, pub, or even public procurement, so that they can then provide that information on to the end user.
Yeah, we do. And I think the challenge that we've always had with hospitality is that we will provide the ingredients, and then obviously the chef is combining ingredients to come up with a finished product. And we do quite a bit of work around menu suggestions, and from the back of those menu suggestions, you can give the chef all the nutritional information and content and allergens and everything else, so all of that can be communicated. But obviously, a lot of chefs are creating just their own dishes, and it's quite hard then to calculate a lot of stuff that people may be looking for. But I definitely see it as a technology opportunity in terms of companies obviously making that easier. And as you say, I think if anything, COVID has accelerated the reliance on technology and the expectation that all the information that we need is in the palm of our hands. Definitely. I suppose just taking a step back, obviously, where do you see the UK's role in trade, insofar as should we be at the vanguard of standards, or should we be at the we just want to have the bare minimum in terms of standards. Obviously, we have a very high level of food standards at the moment. Do you see that as a competitive advantage or disadvantage as we start to seek our new trading relationships with different countries?
Mm. I mean, trade and national identity are linked. So the questions around the national identity that the United Kingdom wishes to hold in terms of its place in the world, and the trade policies with which it then negotiates with other partners globally are going to be, there's a lot of connections there. And I think there is an opportunity for the United Kingdom now, given the current circumstances, to absolutely be the vanguard of standards for other countries to sort of follow and to uphold. But in negotiation, it's very difficult sometimes to set standards which may be too high for others to work with. And so perhaps compromises will need to be made. And that's where I think questions will begin to be asked around compromises that are going to be made. So if the UK and the EU are already deemed to be internationally, two blocks which have very high standards, if we then turn to start negotiating with others beyond that block, there's going to be room for negotiation, isn't there? And that leads to compromises. So I think I have some questions in my mind around that, around how far the United Kingdom will be willing to compromise, and how much that compromise will impact the national identity of the country. That it, as we begin to set forth on this new path of independence. So these questions are in my mind. The other question I think that links into my mind in terms of trade policy is around, again, linked to being about national identity. How do you then broaden the audience to the citizens? Because ultimately national identity affects all citizens, and all citizens who collectively create national identity perhaps should have a say.
Yeah.
So I think there is another, again, opportunity now to really engage a much broader group of citizens in the dialogue about, okay, what is our national identity? What do we want it to be? What do we want our standards to be in the world? What vanguards do we want to take to the world?
Yeah.
Do we want to lead on climate change? And how far are we willing to not compromise on these vanguards that we're taking out? So I think there is a big opportunity, but lots of questions associated with that. And very interesting times ahead. And I think Trade Unwrapped is a really valuable platform in that, to perhaps open up that dialogue to a much broader representation of citizens, so that we can understand, what do they want? What do they think? What do farmers want? What do they need? What about the hospitality businesses? What about the pubs? What about the restaurants? So that conversation, I think, is very timely and very important. The question is, how much will it inform what then happens when the two trade negotiators for the United Kingdom and another country sit down to actually negotiate? Because, as I said, compromises will have to be made. So very interesting times, but big opportunities. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think probably the question of national identity is above our pay grade. But I do think what we need to have is a wider platform of discussion. I think one of the criticisms that's been levelled at the government from the response to COVID is, yes, it's okay to follow the science, but all you're doing is following the science. What about the views of the economists? What about the views of the behavioural psychologists? What about the views of various other bodies? And I think trade is that similar sort of far-reaching topic, where you actually need to be getting in a variety of different views. You should be trying to explain to people, yes, here is the views, as you say, to do with the environment and food miles and the relative environmental impacts of meat versus plant proteins and X, Y, Z. And here is the economic argument in relation to cost of production, supply chain costs, etc. And here is the governance information in terms of, you know, integrity of supply chain, Anti-Slavery Act, child labour, and all that sort of stuff. So, and understanding that trade-off that says, you know, you can't have top quality, best in class, super cheap food. You know, if you could, then everybody would be producing that. So having a more informed discussion around what are the trade-offs that, as you say, ultimately those trade negotiators will have to be making. Wouldn't it be great to have, you know, a consensus view of the population that says, actually, I know that I'm negotiating on behalf of the UK population, and their view generally is they have a greater weighting towards this than that. They're more prepared to give on this area than that area, but they're absolutely not prepared to go lower than this standard on that area. And, you know, to a certain extent, we may have missed the boat on that because we should have been doing it over the last 3 years. But it would be great to find a forum to start that sort of level of discussion, wouldn't it?
I agree, absolutely. At least for the negotiator to know where the red lines are.
Yes.
So say, right, we cannot go below this line, because, as I said, compromises are going to have to be made in any trade negotiation. Compromises need to be made, but at least if the red lines are drawn, then there is some assurance. And if those red lines are drawn, as you say, informed by the British population, then that would be an ideal scenario for any political party, I would think, in leading this way forward. Absolutely agree with that. And when it comes to food, because I mean, the risks are so high, but at the same time, the opportunities are so high to have an impact on improving standards globally, as well as ensuring that we don't lower standards here nationally. It would be a big opportunity not to be missed. I mean, that's what Trade Unwrapped is for me. What does it represent for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps that's the next opportunity is have a broader discussion around what are the pros and cons. You know, let's get some competing views in place of what are the pros of cheap food versus, you know, more expensive food. What are the pros of importing products that we could grow in the UK? What are the pros and cons of maybe limiting some of the more extravagant ranges of products that we have in the UK with a view to saving on air miles and things like that. I think, you know, those are the sort of areas that we need to discuss, and I don't see anywhere else that's having those discussions. And we've seen, you know, we saw from Brexit, the fact that Brexit was coming down, or the EU exit discussions were coming down, you know, purely allegedly around fisheries, shows that, you know, at the end of the day, food is a hugely emotive area that we have an interest and a passion in as a nation. And I think, you know, lots of people would want their voices to be heard, you know, in that discussion.
Yeah.
And I think it would carry a lot of weight, because the risk if we don't do that is that, as you say, a trade deal will be struck and then people will just spend all their time trying to sell it to the population as to why it's a good deal, without having understood what the population would like to see in the first place, which
exactly. And economic nationalism isn't something which is specific only to the United Kingdom at this stage. Many countries around the world are pursuing economic nationalism. I mean, the USA has been pursuing economic nationalism for the past few years. Throughout the Trump administration, we've seen that really, you know, come to the fore with regards to trade negotiations, or some call it the trade war with China, for example. And it seems to me that Joe Biden isn't really going to take a very, divergent position to what has already been become the reality with China. So I think economic nationalism is going to be perhaps around for some years to come. So we have to, I think, be mindful of that. This is not just about what the United Kingdom wants to be and wants to communicate, but we have to be mindful of what is happening with others around the world. And in that respect, I think as well as focusing on our trade policy outward, it's really valuable also to focus on what we are doing, looking within, and looking at our own food and farming systems to see what improvements can be made to the system. You know, what greater efficiencies and productivity can be drawn. What more support can we provide locally to, and when I say locally, I mean, you know, nationally in the United Kingdom, to basically perhaps lessen our reliance on what is becoming an, you know, a difficult global scenario, I think, politically speaking and economically speaking at the moment.
Yeah, and as we both know, that's a huge work stream within the Food Farming and Countryside Commission, and lots of work being done around, you know, the whole agroecology, land management framework, etc. So do check out the Food Farming and Countryside Commission website for more details. So I think that's a pretty wide-ranging discussion. As we say, probably as ever with these things, more questions than answers. But obviously, what we're interested in is having the opportunity to influence the answers over the next few years. Have you got any sort of final thoughts you want to leave with people, Ufi?
Well, I'm very focused at the moment on climate change and the energy and the environment. And we have COP26 in the United Kingdom in November this year. And I think it's a very big opportunity for us in the run-up to COP26 to really focus our attention on what more can be done to ensure that we meet our climate commitments as a country, as a nation, and our place in the world. So my hope is that the Trade Unwrapped program is successful in engaging the broader public in that dialogue, because I'd very much like to hear their ideas, their thoughts, you know, get their feedback as we lead toward that big target. Very, very challenging for business. It's a very complex area, very technical, the changes that need to be made. And the reality is that some of those technical solutions don't exist yet. So it's no small task to be able to achieve that major milestone of, you know, transitioning to net zero carbon. And I think that, you know, the support between businesses working together and government supporting business is going to be critical. And the role of regulation, I think, is one that needs to be thought through very carefully as well. So a lot happening over the next few months, all at the same time as businesses having to focus on crisis management and survival.
Yeah.
So hugely challenging time for business, because ultimately, if there's no profit, there's no business. So my final thoughts are really, ideas are needed, and education is needed, as you say, Andrew. Dialogue is needed. So I would encourage everyone to participate, have their voice heard, share their views, share their opinions, share their ideas, because you never know where that new next good idea is going to come from. And we have to connect our entire value chain, and customers included in that, the very end user, be they in the public sector or you know, or the consumer. So my hope is that this Trade Unwrapped program really enables us to do that. So as you say, Andrew, I encourage everybody to get online, share their views, and make sure that we have their voices heard. Yeah,
no, indeed. I mean, thank you, Ufi. I totally concur, and I think that, you know, whichever way that you know, people had their views on leaving the EU, you know, that is the situation that we are in. I always say that, you know, you don't create your environment, but it's the way you respond to your environment that you're in 100% determines the outcome. So it's a great opportunity now for Britain to either, you know, become, you know, a world leader on food standards, trade, environment, and all those other areas, or to, you know, fall behind due to lack of interest or internal squabbling. And obviously, I sincerely hope it's the former, where we actually get our act together and have those broader discussions at the highest and lowest levels to get as many views as possible and create a difference as we go into the 2020s. Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Ufi. Thank you for your time, and I I hope people enjoyed listening to that, and obviously I'm assuming that they can email us or email the Food Farming and Countryside Commission for any more information or questions on things that interest them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.